Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. I have a wonderful colleague and friend on the show joining us today. Her name is Ashley Brichter. She is an educator, speaker, consultant, and entrepreneur, and the founder of Birthsmarter, which started in 2019. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad it finally worked out for us to connect.
Yes. So for listeners, I think this has probably been rescheduled 3, maybe 4 times.
We had some bad luck. Yeah.
Yes, that is the nature of life. But I am so happy that you are on the show today, Ashley, and that we get to have a wonderful conversation on things we love the most, supporting families and supporting birthing individuals. So I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So why don't you start off with a little introduction on yourself and what brought you to Birthsmarter in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to lead with the fact that I think I'm an educator first. I've been pursuing teaching in some capacity since I was I mean like 5, 6, 7. Like I've started playing school when I was really young, and also have been babysitting for as long as I can remember. So the idea that I could fit teaching and supporting families into one profession is definitely a dream come true. I thought I would be a classroom teacher for a long time. That seemed like the only career path for someone with my interests. But I actually come from a long lineage of parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents who have started their own businesses. So it turns out I couldn't really get away from it. And I sort of entered the birth world because of sort of hiring freezes and like political and political changes and funding changes around No Child Left Behind in like 2009, 2010. And I became a postpartum doula at the suggestion of a friend. And she was like, well, if you're not going to like go get a public school teaching job right now, like if you're nannying or piecing it together, you should explore being a postpartum doula. It's so much of what you already do for families anyway. And I took a training just like very much on a whim to see what it was about, and fell in love with the idea that there's somebody whose job it was to go into your house when you had a tiny baby and like hold the baby and learn about baby wearing and nursing and cooking. And it felt so lovely to think about legitimatizing nurturing as a career or profession. So I became a postpartum doula in 2011, and then just like snowballed, becoming a lactation counselor, becoming a birth doula, becoming a childbirth educator between 2011 and 2014. And once I found childbirth education, it was like a light bulb went off, and I could play in the like curriculum and pedagogy space, which I know we both like geek out on separately, just like how people learn and remember information. And I really loved the one-to-many model, as opposed to working with clients one-on-one, where I could really like create, and sort of scaffold their thinking around topics that I had been working in. I also got pregnant in 2014. So it was much nicer for me and my family to have me teach set scheduled classes as opposed to showing up, in the middle of the night or even doing postpartum shifts. Once I had my daughter, it became very challenging because it's hard enough to like cook and clean and care for your own baby, let alone somebody else's at the same time. So that's a little bit of my background. I think that all led me to having the knowledge and experience I needed to develop a different perspective. And really what I developed in those first few years was a strong understanding of like how the current system educates and supports families. And then 2014 to 2017, I had 2 kids. I very much existed in a high and mighty space of I know everything and it's going to be fine. And like everyone else, it was really hard and really complicated. And I got to see firsthand just how much our education and support system has people like predetermined on certain paths, and that there is still language and narratives out there that there's one right way to be doing things. And so Birthsmarter is really the organization that I wanted to have when I was pregnant, which is a space that exists for people who are really open to learning about their bodies, themselves, their relationships, the system that we're in, but does not prescribe a certain outcome, and just like tries to keep a very open mind and non-judgmental approach to how we can move through pregnancy and birth and parenting.
That's incredible. Your journey really shaped how you've built this business and how you continue and will continue to support families. And that's really beautiful to see that coming from the background that you did and then evolving into what it looks like right now. It's like very authentic to your story and your purpose. And I love that. And I love following you. Your newsletters are my favorite. I love reading your newsletter and being like, she gets it.
That's so nice.
I love reading it and being like, because you're sometimes you're just like apologetic about like absolutely like just like, hey guys, this is what it is, and this is what it is, and this is what's gonna be. Sorry, not sorry. And I'm like, if we could all learn to do that a little bit more and just be forgiving and real and just more like ourselves, it's so nice, so refreshing and not so cookie cutter. Like birth, it's just not cookie cutter. And I love that the business is kind of tailored to your personality and your meaning.
Yeah, it's very, Birthsmarter is so real. It's like, it's definitely a real person. We're a very small team. I think that recently, especially, we did like a really beautiful rebrand with the help of a designer, Brie Kane. And so I think now Birthsmarter just looks so much bigger than it is, and feels so much bigger than it is.
Don't say that.
Well,
it is
but you know what I mean? Like I am still very much writing the newsletter being like, y'all, this is what we're showing up with this week. And I love that. But I will say, not to make it smaller than it is, because this is so egotistical of me, but I feel like Brene Brown's newsletters are the same thing. When you got her, I don't know if you got her newsletters, but they're amazing. And you can so tell that she's writing, like she's showing up for it. And I really appreciate that and think that there's a way that interacting with people is so much nicer than interacting with companies,
I think that's really, you hit the nail on the head right there. I think that's what's important. Like in any company, I think we need to start focusing on a little bit more on the human aspect of things. Yeah. But I think that even more in the space that we work in with families and birth and this transformational changing period where there's so much that's just different and unclear and will continue to be unclear, but like embrace the chaos and just like navigate through it with the support that we can get. I'm on board with the human piece. I think if you can't have robots birthing people, that's just for sure.
You can't have robots birthing people. And because you can't have robots birthing people, we need to have a system that embraces what it means for humans to be doing this, right? It's like at some point, something's got to give. So now we have a system that's like sort of requiring robots to be giving birth. And I think in some ways there is a cultural element of like trying to make people more robotic and more, like same across the board. But eventually that's going to prove to be impossible. And so then the system is going to have to really adjust to the fact that people are different. And how can we, as, like medical professionals or folks who are tangential to the medical process, really have just an open-minded approach to how, and a patient-centered approach. I think that's a term that we've been using a lot at Birthsmarter, is patient-centered. And I don't know if Neil Shaw, who's a really wonderful obstetrician, if he coined that or if it's just in the world, but I think like for the last 10 years or so, evidence-based has been really trending, right? Like everything has to be evidence-based medicine. And I think that there is a move now into patient-centered medicine as opposed to evidence-based, so we can really incorporate that human element.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that in physical therapy school that we have to talk about. And I don't know if they do this in medical school or to what capacity is. There's like these 3 bubbles that we always have to look at when we're treating a patient. And one is the evidence-based aspect of it. And then number 2 is the patient-centered aspect of it. And then the 3 is the clinician experience approach to it. So you combine those 3 bubbles, and that's the only way you could treat a patient, because if it's contraindicated in the evidence, you don't want to do that. But it's like, okay, so what's the patient want that's supported in the literature? What does a patient need from my experience? And how do we piece all of this together harmoniously to give the best care that we can, given the situation, given the restrictions, given the circumstances, and given each individual's unique, not just the patient's individual and unique needs, but the person who's serving them's unique and individual abilities as well. Like, you have to piece all of that together. Like, no one physical therapist can provide the exact same intervention in the exact same way all the time to the same type of individual either. A lot of it's like the communication, it's like the connecting dot actually between, or the lines between the 3 bubbles at the end of the day is a communication. How does the practitioner, the clinician, the caregiver of whatever kind, how are they communicating to the person who's receiving the care to optimize their level of care too? Because you could go on and on talking about an evidence-based protocol, and it's like the patient is just absolutely not okay with it. And even if it's supposed to work, it's just not going to work, you know? So yeah, that's like an interesting thing. I think about that a lot with my patients too. And I hope that a lot of clinicians also kind of integrate that in their own ways. It doesn't have to be in the same 3 bubbles, but just thinking about like the fact that you're not always right. Your patient's not always right. And whatever an RCT that was done in 2022 with a wonderful, population size and sample size is also not always right. And we have to kind of understand that and bring the human empathy and the communication and take all of these pieces and just do the best we can at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
So the core of the Birthsmarter philosophy that is in all of our classes, whether it's a childbirth preparation class, a lactation class, is so similar to that. But the 3 circles there are the physiological process. So just sort of like, what do we know about the optimal physiology? How does this happen in the body? The societal context, like what's at play in terms of the big picture, because that's going to like shift and change physiology, right? And then the last one is like, who are you and what are you bringing to the table?
Yeah.
And that's how we really drive our thinking with decision making around things like having an induction or getting an epidural, or even having IV fluids in labor, breastfeeding, or switching over to formula. And it's so helpful to give people a framework like that, because otherwise they're going based on, oh, well, somebody told me I should be doing this, or somebody told me I should be doing this. And you're like, okay, well, we don't know, right? Like, let's think through, what do we know about what is probably best in an optimal situation? What's out there, where are the pressures coming from? And like, tell me about you and your values and your lifestyle and your history. And, and then we can come up with something that feels really good, but it's not going to be the same for everyone.
I love that. I actually wanted to jump to something that you said in your first intro, which I am not quoting you exactly, but you said something along the lines of, this is like the environment and the society that we're in kind of sets people to have these like predetermined paths.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to touch on that a little bit more, and maybe be a little bit more specific on what you feel that seems like in today's
society.
Totally.
I mean, I'll say, so when I fell into this work, I started as a postpartum doula with no intention of becoming a birth doula or doing anything in the actual birth space. And still to this day, people ask if I'm going to become a midwife. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no, that is not for me. And what's interesting about my background there is I was born at a very big hospital in New York City. I was born at Lenox Hill Hospital. Yeah, I was born at Lenox Hill, and my mom had the most, like, if you've seen any of the like early 90s movies where people gave birth in hospitals. I mean, I was born in the 80s, but I feel like the movies, there was like a big slew of them made in the early 90s, where she was just like sweating in her gown alone while like men were making jokes, sort of things. Like, that was our birth. She has really funny stories about my dad and her OB eating pizza while like she was on an epidural alone. It was just like not what we think about birth should be now, but so classic for the time. And she had no idea that that was not, or that she could have expected more. And I think for years until I started this work, I didn't think anything was wrong with that. And in fact, felt that people who tried to have a more natural experience were really, I mean, I don't want to limit it to like there's hippies and not hippies, but for a long time, that was the conversation, right? Like you had to be like a very natural alternative person to look for something that was outside of the system. That was, you go to the hospital, you put on your gown, you get an epidural, and a male OB delivers your baby. And so I think that I had, I didn't want to question that in the way that most people have a hard time questioning their own origin story, right? And so and what happened is I wound up doing a doula training, and I wound up learning about the physiology of birth and the role of oxytocin and the hormones at play in labor and the role of gravity and movement. And I was like, oh no, like it's very logical that we get out of this system. This is not about being alternative or wanting something outside of the current medicine. This is about doing the best job for people, right? And like setting them up for the best outcome. So I wound up developing an understanding where I don't care, how mainstream you are, birth physiology is going to dictate what is important in terms of how you deliver your babies. But I think what I've seen now, Birthsmarter supported like thousands of parents over the last few years, is that people feel that they have to be on this. I'm going to an OB that my colleague recommended, and I'm not going to question. I'm going to trust my doctor. And my doctor might say things like, you don't need to take a birth class because you have me, or you don't need to take a birth class because you're going to get an epidural. And, this is what we do all day, every day. Like, so just like come in and have a baby and don't overthink it. Especially if you're more career focused, you feel like you don't have a lot of time. You feel like I can't predict how it's going to go anyway, right? Like my friends X, Y, or Z, like what is a class going to tell me? Why do I need a doula? Or you have people, so they're sort of in the like winging it camp, right? Just whatever. People have been having babies forever. Or you have people who understand enough about our current system to know that they can't really trust it in entirety. And they go into extreme information gathering mode. And they research everything in the hopes that they can, outsmart it. And they can put together a plan where if they have enough elements that they can control, they're going to have a really positive experience. And I find that both groups of people tend to have a fair amount of anxiety, right? Like we're coming from the same place. And neither group gets the outcome that they're looking for. Because there's definitely a happy medium. But it does feel like that's it. It's like either you've got to research everything, really own it, really make it yours, dedicate yourself to this like massive life transition, or throw your hands up.
Wow. So something that comes to mind on all of what you just said is on 2 different podcast episodes that I listened to in the last week, 2 different guests talked about and like completely different fields, talked about the concept of and not or. So like, it was like one thing was talking about like left wing, right wing, Democrats, Republican concepts. And then the other one was talking about being an entrepreneur versus being a mother. And like, it just cannot always have to be a black and white, or like you're either this or you're that. And how can we integrate, and how do we create balance that doesn't look 50-50, because that's not always what balance needs to look like. And it's just your definition of what it looks like. And so that's what comes to mind when you just said what you said, because it's like you have those people who are like scheduled C-section, no high risk delivery. And then you have like hypnobirthing, completely natural, like everything has to go this way, or it's like a disaster. And then there can somehow be something in between, just again, guided by the physiology of birth. Because at the end of the day, you do have to give birth. And so it's like, how can we figure out what are all of the elements and ways that we can make sure that we're keeping, it's like the 3 bubbles, and like your 3 bubbles too, like all the bubbles, there needs to be 3 bubbles, guys. There's not 2 bubbles. There are 3. That's gonna be the title of the show. I'm joking. It's not going to be 3 bubbles because nobody's going to know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the theme of this show is 3 bubbles. That's what I think it is.
And I think it's 3 bubbles. And it's like, that is actually in contradiction to the pendulum, right? Like, and that's what's so common too, is just like this pendulum is going to swing. It's going to push more people to hypnobirthing, which I actually love. I think hypnobirthing is a great program. Or it's going to push people to like, trust your doctor, don't ask questions. And clearly, like, instead of swinging, we just want to have a framework for making decisions. And the way that we encourage everyone who's pregnant to do that is by learning about birth physiology. And the thing that is like the crux of Birthsmarter is that birth physiology is not the stages of labor. The stages of labor, right? There's early labor, active labor, transition, pushing, and you go, you have to dilate a certain amount along a certain time frame. That is a relatively arbitrary textbook definition of how people have observed births, but that's not the physiology in terms of what's happening in your body that's driving the labor process. And so what we really go into, and we can go into it a little bit or a lot on the podcast, whatever you want to get at, but is understand how babies are born, so that you can understand what you can do to be helpful and how medical interventions might fit into that.
I like the way that you said that. I think it's really just that. It's so hard to say it has to be one way. It's just like anybody who says like, I swear by this and it's the only way, like it's got to be something like, maybe wear sunscreen, maybe, I don't know, like something that's just like, so like, don't like, not drink water at all during the day. Right. It's got to be something like very, like, don't run into traffic. Like, it's got to be those kinds of extreme situations. But when it comes to all these kind of ambiguous, like there's so many outcomes to like birth. And then there's like 500 umbrella things underneath that. It's just not possible. And that's medicine too. That's medicine and that's science. And that's very hard to be like A plus B equals C 100% of the time, because people are just different. Our situations are unique. So tell us a little bit about how people get to know about Birthsmarter, and how do people, like, what are your kind of different offerings, and what can people expect if they were to like go onto your website and try to figure out how can they be involved?
Yeah. So we have some really big plans in the works for the next year, but right now the bread and butter of Birthsmarter is it's like ideal to come in when you're pregnant. If you're trying to conceive, we do have some free classes and workshops and PDFs and things to help you plan. But second and third trimester, we have a suite of classes to take for childbirth ed and postpartum preparation. We offer classes in person in New York City, in Brooklyn and Manhattan, Salt Lake City, and now Phoenix, Arizona, which is really exciting. We're also still offering all of our classes on Zoom. That's something we obviously did in the pandemic, but we just had a class on Zoom yesterday, and it had, I think, 7 or 8 couples, and it's so fun because people can join from all over the country or from Brooklyn, even though there's an in-person class, but they want to be at home in their pajamas. So we really developed a very engaging way of teaching online, and we don't want to give that up just yet. So we're keeping the learning online option. And then we do have on-demand classes if people want to learn on their own time at their own pace. But I think what people can expect is a really unbiased, inclusive, fun space to have conversations that are, there's like no silly questions to ask. You can come in with zero knowledge and have your eyes opened. You can be that information gathering person and you read all the books, but what you're lacking is the context and the ability to connect the dots. And so all of us at Birthsmarter, there are 5 teachers on the team now, and we are all connected by the fact that we have had life experiences that have taught us to like read outside of the lines and help people have this really open-minded perspective. And so that's what you're going to get, whether you're taking a childbirth class or a newborn care class, is just it's context and wisdom and like the space to think critically and creatively about what you might be diving into. And then once you have a baby, we do have what we call newborn survival groups or postpartum survival groups, where you can come on if you're a birth parent or a mom. We have 6-week groups that run on Zoom. We have groups for new dads, LGBTQ partners. So more and more in the postpartum support group phase, and some really fun parenting classes like baby massage and sign language.
Ooh, sign language. I like that.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I'll drop all of that in the show notes and your Instagram handle and everything. So I want to wrap up this conversation with kind of bringing it together and asking you what comes to your mind when you're thinking about somebody who's in labor, who needs to identify these kind of potential obstacles and just figure out how to navigate through that in the moment. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So if it's just a tactical question, right? Somebody's preparing for labor and they need to know how to navigate it. The best framework I can give you is it's actually from the perspective of the partner. So we have what we call 5 partner responsibilities, and it's going to in turn help the person who's laboring. But the 5 partner responsibilities are that we really want them to focus on being the keeper of oxytocin, which means that they're helping the person in labor to produce these hormones that are really released when you're feeling safe. It's the primary driver. And so safety is key because it's going to help your contractions come frequently and come intensely enough to push this baby down and pull the cervix up and out of the way. So focus on feelings of safety, whatever that means for you. Keep it moving, change positions once every 30 to 60 minutes to help the baby shift and rotate through that pelvis. Alpha breathe is for the partner, but for the laboring person, it's focusing on your breath, not from sort of not limited to like a woo-woo relaxation, but your uterus is a muscular organ that needs to be well oxygenated in order to contract, just like you would be running a marathon. And your baby needs oxygen. It's like we know this logically, but then in labor, we can get stressed and scared and hold our breath. And then we don't connect that to, hey, the baby's going to have some heart rate decelerations. So really focus on your breathing. We call partners the chief hydration officer, which is the encouragement for folks in labor to make sure they're drinking water after every contraction, or they have the option to do that. Same thing about really fueling the uterus and just making sure that your body has what it needs. And then the last one is to make sure if you're the partner, you're owning logistics. If you're the birth person, you're delegating logistics. So you need to have somebody around you who is keeping track of the timing and the calling the doctor, calling the doula. Like you let your brain focus on the task at hand, which is coping, and give everything else up to the people that you trust around you. So really build a team that's taking care of you and making those sort of bigger decisions that you don't have the capacity to make. And I think if we can support somebody in those 5 areas, you hope the stars align and the baby's going to make its path of descent without too much drama.
I love every piece of that. For listeners, if you also found all of that incredible, I really hope you guys check out Birthsmarter, go to the website, go to their Instagram handle. Definitely, if you're thinking about birth or if you're thinking about conception or if you're pregnant right now or even postpartum, I think there's so much that you can learn and just be educated on from clearly like a perspective that comes from empathy and not from cookie cutter or this and not that. but rather what can we do to really optimize this time that's so beautiful in our lives? And what can we do to maybe reduce our stress levels? Even 1% is a great feat, right? So I highly encourage you guys to check them out. Thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on the show. This took paths that I didn't know it would, and I love that.
I want to say one more thing, because you might have other PTs or professionals listening, and I always forget to mention this, but we do have Birthsmarter Pro, which is a course for health and wellness practitioners who want to learn about the birth process and really connect the dots between their discipline and birthing. So that course is open. We're working on CEUs, but folks should reach out. And I agree. I never know where these conversations are going to go, but it's so fun talking to you all the time. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And not just about the topic of conception, but I love talking to you about business and just being a female entrepreneur and running something that's small but big. Small but very big. I wish you all the best, Ashley. I know that there's been a lot of transitions even over the last 2 years with Birthsmarter growing and rebranding, and I am such a huge supporter and huge fan of all of your work, and I can't wait to see where this goes. I know it's going to evolve in the best ways possible, so I'm here supporting you from the sidelines.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.